Good morning, Year 5, and happy Tuesday. We're going to read Chapter 7, The Explorer. The explorer returned as they were roasting the carcass, squatting outside their stone room, with the meats on sticks. He held a cluster of mangoes balanced along one arm and a gourd of water in the other hand. They didn't hear him until he was very close. Con jumped and dropped her hunk of bird in the ashes. The explorer didn't look at any of them in the eye. "You're all still growing," he said gruffly, "especially the small one." It occurred to me the bird might not be enough. He flushed as he set the gourd down next to the fire, dropped the mangoes in Max's lap, and turned on his heel. Fred jumped to his feet. "Please, just a minute. We wanted to ask, what is this place? Do other people know about it? Do you live alone here? Why, were you hoping to throw a garden party? I meant, do other people ever come?" "Sometimes people pass by this place, yes." The explorer squatted down, took Max's meat, which had caught fire, out of his hand, and shook it until it went out. He balanced it in the tips of the flames. "None of them stay long. Some are travelling long distances. Tribespeople. People whose ancestors lived here. They usually stay a few days." He twisted the chunk of bird in the tips of the flames. Dew stripped from it on the fire. "But yes," he said, "in short, people do come." Con and Lila exchanged delighted glances. Backer, who was unusually full of energy, for a sloth, waved one claw in the air. "Would they help us?" asked Lila. "Could they take us with them to Manus?" "They might, very possibly. It depends on the people." "How often do they come?" asked Fred. "Oh, every few years." He blew on the meat and handed it to Max. "That's ready." Fred saw Lila and Con sag. They each looked a little more tired, a little older. "Years?" said Lila. "Our parents wouldn't be able to wait that long." "No, I'd imagine not," said the explorer. "But in that case," began Con, "couldn't you—" She stopped as a vulture flapped out from behind a stone pillar and came to the rest against the man's knee, eyeing her meat. The bird ruffled its wings at her and cawed. Con held her food closer to her chest. Lila took up her words. "Could you help us to get home?" The explorer gave them an appraising, sharp-edged look. Perhaps, said Lila. "I could point you towards Manus. It's a month's walk, or a week and a half by canoe. I could give you some provisions, and a map. I might come a short way with you. I'll have to see." Lila's eyes lit up. "That would be absolutely But," said the explorer. "But?" Fred held his breath. "You will have to swear never to speak about this place, never to tell that you saw a city in the jungle. More than swear, you will have to prove to me that you will not—" "What?" Fred stared at the explorer, and then past him, across the stone landscape, sprawling green and yellow and gold away from them into the jungle. "Never tell of this place? This? Why?" "Or about me. Ever. All of you. Including the little one." Fred searched the explorer's face for evidence that he might be joking. "But my father will ask where I was." Fred had already imagined the conversation they would have, how he would draw for his father the layout of the city, how he would pace out the distance of the city square and memorize the measurements, how his father would squeeze his shoulder and tell him he had done something remarkable. He'd imagined his father telephoning his friend for the Oxford who worked at the Times. He'd imagined his father's voice. "Tim, listen to my son, has done something extraordinary." The man was watching him, and his face was not sympathetic. "It's very likely," he said. "You will have to lie to him." "But, no, the whole point of explorers is to tell people about what they've found. That's what explorers do." "Exactly so, and I am not an explorer. I am a man who happens to be here." "But people have been talking about a place like this for hundreds of years," said Fred. "You have to let everyone know what they weren't just stupid old men with bad theories. They were right." "Why do I?" "Because, if this place does exist, it means they weren't fools. It means they were heroes." It meant, though Fred did not say it, that it was not foolish, not mad, to dream of being an explorer himself. Heroes don't exist, boy. They're inventions made up of new spirits and quotable lines of photogenic moustaches. He grunted in disgust. "You can't bear moustaches myself. Grotesquely mouth eyebrows, I always thought." "That's not true. Men died looking for something like this. They died wanting to prove to the world it existed." "People have died for many things. It's not difficult to die." "But you're wrong." The word deserves to know. Fred felt his forehead burning. He knew he must be turning red. But if they told, his name and Lila's and Con's and Max's would be part of history. Their names would be included in the list of great discoveries. As if he had read his thought, the explorer curled his lip. "And you, perhaps, wish to be one to tell them?" Fred's head jerked backwards, as if the man had flicked boiling water in his face. "It's not that." The explorer blinked a slow, contemptuous blink. "Isn't it?" Fred clenched one fist. It would be selfish not to tell, would it? For the first time, Fred realised the others weren't joining in. Con sat, looking down at her hands. Lila was stroking back with unusual intensity. Max was sucking his wrist, his mouth turned down at the corners. "Fred," said Lila. Her voice was very quiet, and she didn't look at him. "We need to go home." Con moved closer to him. She whispered hotly in his ear, "You're being ridiculous. Just promise whatever he wants to get us out of here." "No," said Fred. He edged away from her. Con's whisper became a hiss. "We can still tell everyone when we get home. How's he going to know? He hardly going to be getting newspapers out there." "No," said Fred out loud. "I'm not promising anything." The explorers rose, lit red by the flames of the fire. The light shone onto the scars in the crook of his elbow and onto his knuckles. "I have asked you to perform an easy task, to keep your mouth shut. You are refusing?" "No," said Con. "We'll do whatever you want. Fred, for goodness sake, just say it." "You can't keep it a secret," said Fred. "It's not your secret to keep." "Look," said Con to the explorer. "He might not promise, but he will. Can't you help us at least? He can stay here for all I care." But the explorer's face was growing red at the neck and white around his nose and mouth. Sorry, that was my dog. His whole face cross-hatched with anger. "You," he glanced at Fred, "are a fame-hungry, thin-brained, ignoramus, and desert your friends. And you," he glared at Con, "would apparently happily desert your friend. You disgust me, the lot of you. He's not my friend, not now." Quiet. Keeping his temper did not seem to be the explorer's speciality. His voice rose to a roar. "I see no reason to help any of you. Why should I? Good God, if children had come any use, we surely would have discovered it by now." He turned away. He shoved his fists into his pockets and then drew something out. "I'd forgotten. I brought you this. I'd not expected your response to my request. None of you deserve it." Max let out a mew and curled up his knees. The explorers dropped the thing on the ground and strode into the dark. He reached the wall they'd fallen down and began to climb it, fast, using both arms and only one leg, the other swinging loosely at his side. "Fred," said Con, "you're completely unfair, and you're welcome to die here yourself, but you've got no right to ruin everything for the rest of us." Max began to sniff and hiccup with the beginnings of tears. Fred picked up the thing the explorer had dropped. It was a screw of soft leaves, fastened to the top with thick grass. He opened it. Inside was a pinch of salt, mixed with some flakes of dried green something. "It's seasoning," he said, "for the bird." "Stop changing the subject," snapped Con. "Look, you've got to agree. Go and run after him and tell him you've changed your mind." "I can't." "Why not? You don't have to actually do it. You just have to say it." "I just can't." He thought of his father. He thought of going back to school, not just as the Peterson boy, the one with no mother, but a boy who faced down the jungle and discovered a whole world. "Please, Fred," said Lila. "Please do what Con says. Run after him. Our parents will be so worried. They might die of it." Max's eyes widened and Lila sighed. "I didn't mean it, Max. It's an expression." "It's too late anyway," said Fred. "You heard him. He won't help any of us now. He's too angry." "Because you made him angry," said Con. "So did you," snapped Fred. "You can do whatever you want. I'm not swearing to a lie, all right?" "What, because you think you're so high and moral?" Max covered his ears with his hands. "No, because I won't, all right? Because it would be lying about the most important thing that's ever happened to me. He'd never know. You just don't want to get your name in the papers." "Yes, he would. He would find out, wouldn't he? Because people would have to come and try to find it again, to take photographs and to do archaeological digs. I don't care what happens once I'm home. This whole place can burn," Con said. "Stop it," shouted Lila. Her voice rang through the courtyard. They turned to her in surprise. "Shut up, both of you." Every inch of her body was stiff with anger. "You're both being disgusting. If it's too late, then there's no point in fighting. And if you make Max cry again, I swear I'll punish you both." Max climbed into Lila's lap and buried his face into Becca's fur. Fred swallowed. He tried to recatch his temper. He held out the seasoning. "Do you want some? We might as well eat it." "No, it could be poisonous," said Con. Fred withdrew his meat from the fire. It was black in patches and the skin was charred and steaming. He pulled off the skin with his fingers, wincing at the heat, and sprinkled a pinch of salt and unknown herbs onto the bird. Defiantly, averting his eyes from Con's glare, he took a bite. The first taste of it shot through his body. It was a flavour that got into your fingertips, hot and rich and wild. "Not poisonous," he said. "It's good." "I hope you choke in it," said Con. Soon it was entirely dark, but for the fire and the moon, the flames cast light out into the city square, throwing its corners into strange dusky shapes. Con shivered as a cloud swept past the moon, lengthening the shadows. Lila hunched over and began to search back his fur for ticks, avoiding Fred's eyes. Fred looked towards the curtain of vines. They hung in the dark, a green sweep of shadow covering the right-hand corner of the square. "What do you think's behind there?" he asked. "What do you think he doesn't want us to see?" "I don't know," said Con, "and I don't care." She had brushed her hair in front of her eyes so nobody could see her face. "It could be an animal," said Lila. She glanced up and then away. "A panther, like in the Jungle Book." "It might be food stores," said Fred. Max sat up. "Real food?" "Why would he keep it in there?" said Lila. "I was thinking there must have been a place for storing food when this city was alive, and it's where I'd keep stores. Somewhere almost invisible." Fred looked around, checking the Explorer was nowhere near. "I think we should go and look." "Oh, sure, that's a great idea," said Con. "You've already made him so angry he's going to let us rot here. Why not add stealing his food? He could kill you with his bare hands, but I'm sure that doesn't worry you." "I wouldn't steal. It would be borrowing, and even then, not unless we have to." "What do you mean, have to?" If he won't help us, we might have to find other ways." "To do what?" said Con. "To find enough supplies to start the journey to Manus." Fred gestured around the empty city. "There's not much food here." Con was growing red. "You do know this is your fault. You said if we followed the map we'd get home, and then the second you get here, you ruin it." "I didn't." Fred could feel his neck and cheeks flushing. "I didn't expect the map to lead to a madman with a pet vulture living alone in an ancient city. That's not something any of us predicted." "You promised we'd get home." "We will get home," said Fred, though he was fairly sure he hadn't promised. Who was he to promise anything? But he only said, "I want to know. Aren't you curious?" "No," said Con. She swiveled on her bottom and turned her back to face him. He couldn't see the sharp thinness of her shoulder blades poking out through her blouse. He would never find out. He could find food, Fred thought. Then it wouldn't matter that the Explorer said or did. They could get back to the raft and go looking for Manus. If he could find food, then the chill of Con's anger and Lila's disappointment might be swept away. "Do what you want. I'm not going over there," said Con. "Lila?" asked Fred. Lila had been watching them argue, her head turning from one to the other, her eyes growing steadily more unhappy. "It's getting dark. He wouldn't see us. Do you want to come?" Lila hesitated. "I don't know. He trusted us." "But he doesn't. He clearly doesn't trust us at all. He won't even tell us his name." "Please," said Fred. The wall of vines hung like a threat in the corner of the city square. "It's just to look." Lila stared out across the dark square. "Fine. OK, I'll come." "Thank you." Fred jumped to his feet. "Are you sure, Con?" "Very, very sure." "Could you look after Max?" said Lila. "He's not yet figured out how silence works, really." Con agreed, though without much pleasure. Fred and Lila moved slowly across the square, feeling their way in the half-dark. In between the avenue of trees, the ground was smooth, entirely free of weeds and leaves and jungle debris, but on either side there were piles of stone, two half-ruined circular mud buildings that looked like grain stores, and shoots of growing things springing up everywhere. "What do you think that was?" Fred asked. "I don't know, but if this was the city square, then those statues would be their town monuments, or maybe their gods. Like we have lions in Trafalgar Square." At the thought of them just a gust of longing for home swept over him. "Yes, our papa talks about them, and then everyone would live around the sides of the Central Avenue, or up in the jungle in tree houses. That's how I'd do it, anyway." "He's crazy to tell us to keep it secret," said Fred. "It's amazing. It's not like anything I've ever seen in my life." He glanced at Lila from the corner of his eye. "We can't keep it all for himself." Lila didn't reply. She only stared fixedly ahead. There was a sound of footsteps running behind them. Fred sprang round, but it was Con with Max in tow. "He changed our minds," said Con, panting hard, "but we're not talking to you." "She made me come," said Max. "She saw a shadow and thought it was a snake." "I didn't, you little rat." Lila and Fred exchanged glances. "You'll have to be quiet, Maxie," said Lila. "I'm always quiet," said Max with dignity. He turned to put his tongue out at his sister, tripped on a stone and let out a howl loud enough to wake the sleeping birds. "My toe!" "Shh!" said Lila. A tree rustled, then stilled abruptly. Con looked around nervously. "Should we go back?" Fred shook his head. "You can," he said. "I need to see." As they approached the far end of the square, the clouds moved over the moon, sweeping black shadows over the statues' faces. They looked alive. Behind the statues ran a mud and stone wall, high over their heads. The left edge of the wall ended in a crumbling ruin, overrun with patches of light yellow flowers. The right side vanished in a curtain of vines. The vines the explorer had forbidden them from touching. Fred approached the vines. They rustled. He stepped backwards. It might have been the wind, or something living behind them. He tried not to think of snakes. He reached out and pushed a handful of vines away. Lila joined him. Behind the vines was another, thicker curtain. They seemed plaited together like wickerwork, woven so densely Fred could barely fit a hand through the green mass. He pushed both arms into the vines, elbow deep, and tugged. There was a flash of colour amid the green. Then the vines fell back. "I can see something," he hissed. "Shh," said Con. "What?" asked Lila. "I don't know. A piece of yellow. I can't see it any more. We'll have to cut the vines," he said. He took the knife from his pocket. "No, wait," said Con. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "It is," said a voice over their heads. "An exceptionally bad idea." Fred froze. There was a smack of shoe on stone, and the explorer jumped down from the top of the wall, landing inches in front of Fred's face, grunting at his bad leg hit the ground. He straightened up, his face rigid with fury. "I asked you to stay away," he said softly. "Is that so difficult?" A cold dread shot through Fred. The look on the explorer's face was worse than being caned at school. "I'm really sorry." Fred's tongue was suddenly dry. "We just thought—" "You thought. Are you so grotesquely lacking in self-control that you cannot let a single idle thought pass through your mind without acting on it?" "We're so sorry," began Lila. "Just get away from here," said the explorer. His skin radiated hot rage. Desperation was rising in Fred's blood. He could see Max shaking with fear. He stepped in front of him. "We weren't going to take anything," he said. He felt the burn of the lie flood through him, and stumbled over the words. "We just needed to see—" "I said go. Just go." "It was my fault," said Fred. "It was my idea, not theirs." "I don't care whose idea it was." The explorer pulled the knife from his belt. He pointed at Fred's chest. "Go to bed. If I ever find you anywhere near the vines again, I'll cut off your fingers while you sleep and fry them in banana oil and feed them to the vulture for dessert." Fred turned and led the way back down the centre of the boulevard, shame pulsing in his chest. Even Max didn't make a sound. So, just like we would in class, we are going to have today as an editing lesson, okay? We finish any of the work that you have done so far, and then we're going to take slide by slide looking at different things. So the first thing is you will need a dictionary, or you will need an iPad or Google just to use the dictionary online. I want you to proofread your work, okay? Do all the spellings look accurate? Put a little dot above the word like we would in class, okay? And then find the correct spelling. We would be using purple pen in class, but you can use any other colour if you are at home, okay? So, for this editing station, what I'd like you to do is read through your work, put a little squiggle under any of the words that you feel you could up-level. And remember, what we mean by up-level is that you think we can find a better word choice by using the thesaurus or typing into Google and looking at a different synonym, okay? Things like, I'm thinking if you've used the word said, could you use a different vocabulary choice because you want to make sure that Fred sounds like he's angry or Con sounds like she's concerned, or maybe the other way around. Okay, have a read through it and see if there's any words you would use, change. Use a different colour pen and write them just next to it, okay? So for this one, we would call these obviously cups, and it'd be the C part of the cups if we was in school. Have a look, okay? Read through your work. It's really important you do this. You should have done this anyway after your pieces of work. Start of a sentence. Have you got a capital letter, okay? Have you been using capital letters for the characters? Have you used them for the proper nouns, okay? Have you been using them for the start of the speech? Go through them and correct them. So for this one, I'd like you to think about using expanded noun phrases. Now, you'd have done this in year 4, in year 3 and in year 5. All it means is simply you find the noun, and you are going to be expanding them by using adjectives, okay? Got an example there. The desolate, derelict building swayed as the ground shook violently. So they've chosen the word building and they thought, oh, how could I describe the word building? Okay, have a look through your work. We don't want to do it in every single noun because otherwise it's going to get a little bit wordy as our writing. But think about if there are any words, any nouns that you could describe. It might be a person that you want to describe. Okay, it might be the jungle, it might be the setting. Okay, you might want to use a thesaurus for this. Okay. The next task, okay, the next editing station, I want you to find some pronouns and we're going to add extra information to them. Look at the example I've got. Fred, who was tired, looked nervously over at Con. Max likes the aquaberries, which tasted divine. So we've added some relative pronouns in here. Look at the first example where it says Fred, who was tired. So we've given Fred a little bit more information to the reader about Fred. And I've split that sentence up using commas. I've added who was tired as my extra information about Fred. I could have just put, Fred looked nervously over at Con, but I wanted to add extra information about Fred and put it between Fred, okay? So Fred, who was tired, looked nervously over at Con. The second sentence, I wanted to describe the aquaberries, so this time I've used the relative pronoun which, because we're talking about an object, the aquaberries. Have a look through your work, see if there's any relative clauses that you can add in. So for this one, we've done some work on modal verbs in class. It's all about adding the possibility of something happening, how likely it is to happen. So we could put the aquaberries look tasty. They could be the best thing they've tasted in their whole lives. I've got some examples of modal verbs there below. See if you can add some in. It's important is this one. Don't just add them in if it doesn't make sense, okay? If you feel like your story or narrative doesn't sound right with adding just random modal verbs in, do not use them, okay? But it's important to have a look and see if you can think they could be used effectively, okay? So for this one, we've looked at parenthesis, okay, before. We add in just a single dash in, okay. Can be used to mark the point use of parenthesis or to connect two independent clauses together. Look at my example here. In the far distance, they noticed a small den-like shape. They soon realised they were not alone. Notice how I've added that extra part of that information onto the sentence. The sentence still makes sense if I took away the dash sentence, but I'm adding that extra information in there. Okay? So for this one, I want you to go through your work and see if you can add any adverbs. Okay, so words or phrases that modify the meaning of an adjective, okay, or a verb, and they give you more information. So they might say how something's been done. Happily, Fred rose to his feet. Or you might say when something's happening, just before the explorer came. Okay, or where something is. Beside the jungle, beside the tall green tree. See if you can add these adverbs in to your sentences. So for this one, see if you can add any similes in there, okay? So it compares something to something different and uses the word like or as. We've done some of this in class before. Again, if your narrative doesn't need a simile or doesn't sound right with a simile, don't just add it in for the sake of it. But it does make our narrative sound a little bit more interesting, so you can always see if you can have a go there, okay? Read through your work and really think, ooh, could I compare this to something else? His eyes were as blue as the ocean. Okay, can you add that in there to add that little bit more of description into your narrative? So again, we've done this in class, parenthesis, which gives you that extra information. It's a bit of an explanation or an afterthought into a passage, and without it, it's still complete, okay? So for example, the beast, hungry and cold, trekked through a deserted wasteland in hope of finding food and shelter. Notice the parentheses there, they've used brackets. If I took away hungry and cold, the sentence would still make sense without it. The beast trekked through the deserted wasteland in hope of finding food and shelter. So can you add any of the parentheses in? Remember, parentheses comes in the form of brackets, commas or dashes. So for this, have a look, and you've been doing this as part of your writing anyway. It's been using some fronted adverbials. Now remember, they always come with a comma. Now you've got on yesterday's piece of work, you've got your fronted adverbials examples. Go through and please make sure you've got some sentences starting with fronted adverbials, okay? You can open your sentences using, you might say, unexpectedly, as quick as a flash, unrealistically, okay? Have a look through the models on the last PowerPoints and see if you can magpie any of the ideas, all right? So for this one, go through your work, see if you've got some coordinate conjunctions in there. Okay, remember they link main clauses together to form compound sentences. Okay, the dog jumped up and he began to bark. I don't like sprouts, nor do I like carrots. Joey ran as fast as he could, yet Jill won the race. Now look at the fanboys there. That shows you all the different coordinating conjunctions you can use. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. Have you used any? Okay, see if you can add some in. So here, see if you can use subordinating conjunctions. Okay, that is where the sentence won't make sense without the subordinating clause there. So, could you use although, as, wherever, in case, though, even if, because, until, since. See if you can see if you've used any, see if they make sense. See if you can add some sentences with the use of subordinating conjunctions in there. Okay?